Montana Territory, 1879. Snow still clung to the pine shadows on the edge of Elk Creek when Tessa Ellwood stepped onto her porch with her youngest in one arm and a rifle in the other. She had not meant to aim it at the man on horseback, but the way her heart jumped at seeing him there again, quiet, steady, patient, that rifle came up more out of habit than threat. "Morning, ma'am," the cowboy said with a calm nod, not moving an inch from where he sat, his bay gelding outside her gate. Tessa narrowed her eyes. "You are here again?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Just passing by. You passed by yesterday." "I did." The baby in her arms, Gabriel, squirmed and she jostled him gently. Behind her the door creaked and her two older children, Grace and Gideon, peeked out. Grace clutched her brother's hand, their faces smeared with flour from helping with biscuits. Her children had learned too early what it meant to be watchful, cautious. "You can stop passing by anytime," Tessa said, lowering the rifle but not relaxing. The cowboy tipped his hat. "I'll wait." "If that's what it takes." She stared at him for a long second. "Wait for what?" "For you not to raise a gun at me," he said, mouth tugging into something like a smile, though it had no mockery in it, only patience. He turned his horse and rode on, leaving behind only hoof prints in the muddy road and a strange warmth curling in her chest. His name was Jasper McCade. She learned that 2 days later when he returned with a sack of apples, and said it was payment for the time he scared her chickens last week when he rode too close to the fence. She had not seen the chickens fussing, nor had she asked for apples, but still she took them. Her children liked him right away. Gideon, 8 and full of questions, followed Jasper's every move as he fixed the gate post that had been leaning for weeks. Grace, nearly 10, watched from the porch with Gabriel on her lap, her eyes wide and curious. They asked about his horse, his saddle, the scar on his knuckle. Jasper never pushed toward the house. He never crossed her fence without asking. But he showed up once or twice a week, always with a reason, never with pressure. And always with that quiet steadiness that made something in Tessa ache. She had buried Thomas Ellwood 4 winters ago. He had died in a river accident when they were trying to get the last of their supplies to a neighbor before the snow came. He had been a good man, kind and hardworking, and when he died, Tessa had picked up every piece of their life and carried it forward on her own. No man had set foot on her porch since. Not until Jasper McCade started waiting by her gate. One afternoon in early spring, a hard wind blew across the valley. Tessa was hauling water from the well when she heard Grace scream. She dropped the bucket and ran. Gideon had climbed the barn ladder to the loft and slipped. He was dangling from a beam, hands clinging, feet swinging above the floor. Grace stood below, frozen in panic. Gabriel was wailing in the dirt. Tessa barely had time to register the scene when a blur of motion came from the trail. Jasper, riding hard, vaulting off his horse before it even stopped. He ran past her, caught Gideon under the arms, and hauled him down. She dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around her boy, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might choke on it. "You all right?" Jasper asked, brushing dirt off Gideon's shirt, steadying the boy. Tessa looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. "You were not even close by," she whispered. He shrugged. "Wanted to check on your fence. Something told me to hurry." She stood, and for the first time she did not feel the need to keep space between them. She reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you," he tipped his head, voice low. "Anytime." That night, after the children had gone to bed, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The stars were out, clear and sharp above the hills. Jasper had not stayed after the rescue. He had ruffled Gideon's hair, checked the boy's scraped elbow, and rode off like he always did. But something had shifted. She heard his horse before she saw him. He rode up quiet, stopping just outside the gate. He stayed mounted, hat in his hands. "I will not come any closer," he said. "But I needed to ask if he was all right." Tessa stood, her voice caught. "He is, thanks to you." He nodded but did not move. She surprised herself by stepping down from the porch and walking to the gate. She opened it. Jasper's eyes flicked to hers. "You sure?" "No," she said, heart thudding. but I am done hiding behind fences." He dismounted and came to stand beside her, not too close, just enough. They stood in the dark, the wind easing through the trees, and she realized her hands were not shaking anymore. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Still am. I will wait," he said simply. "As long as it takes," she looked up at him, eyes wide. "Why?" "Because I see how strong you are, and I want to build something that lasts with someone like you." Her throat closed tight. "I have 3 children, a full life, a hard one." His hand brushed hers. "Then let me carry part of it." She did not answer. But she did not pull her hand away. By mid-April, the thaw had worked its way down into the soil, and the creek behind Tessa's property ran swift with meltwater. The children spent their mornings helping her turn the vegetable beds, and their afternoons carrying water in tin buckets to soften the rows. The days lengthened slowly, sun hanging low and golden through the cottonwoods. Jasper came on Wednesdays now, steady as sunrise. He brought no gifts, offered no excuses. Just showed up, sleeves rolled from the elbow, and lent his hands where they were needed. That morning, he sharpened the mower blade without being asked and said nothing when she offered coffee in a chipped enamel mug. He drank it beside the barn, boots planted wide, eyes on the tree line. "Is that where you came from?" Tessa asked, nodding toward the ridge. "South of Butcher's Hill." He glanced over, then back at her. "Rode through it, didn't stay." "Nothing much left after the fire 2 years ago." She folded her arms, watching him over the rim of her mug. "You keep moving, seems like you don't plant roots." He met her gaze. "I've been looking for the right soil." They stood quiet for a beat too long. Somewhere behind them, Gabriel let out a delighted shriek as Grace chased him with a handful of dandelion fluff. Tessa didn't smile. She looked down at her boots. "I've had to be the whole of this place for a long time. I don't. I wouldn't know how to share it anymore." "Doesn't mean you can't learn, doesn't mean I can't learn too." She looked up again, something unreadable in her face. "You ever been married?" "No." "Why not?" Jasper scratched his jaw. "Almost did once, before the war. She married someone else while I was gone." Tessa didn't speak right away. The wind tugged at the edge of her shawl. "You ever wish you could go back and change it?" she asked. "No," he said. "If I had, I wouldn't be here." She turned slowly and walked toward the house. "Lunch is ready." He followed, not close, but close enough. Inside, the table was already set. Grace had made cornbread, uneven and slightly burned at the edges. Gideon had brought in a jar of pickled beets from the cellar and was trying to open it with a butter knife. Jasper took it wordlessly and twisted the lid free over the meal. The talk stayed light. Jasper never interrupted. He let Gideon ramble about the blackbird nest in the rafters, listened while Grace explained the difference between wild onions and meadow garlic. Gabriel, sticky with molasses, offered him a piece of biscuit which Jasper accepted with slow reverence. Afterward, while Tessa washed dishes in the basin and the children drifted outside, Jasper leaned against the doorframe. "Tell me something true," she said without turning. He didn't hesitate. "I was tired of riding with no reason." She turned her head slightly. "And now I stay for a reason." She dried her hands, setting the towel aside. "I haven't told them about anything. They think you're just helping with the fence and the garden. That's all I've done." "You know what I mean," Jasper nodded. "You tell them when you're ready." "I don't want them to hope for something that might not last." "I won't vanish, Tessa." "Not unless you want me gone." She stepped closer then, close enough to smell the dust and sun on his shirt. "I'm not used to someone staying. Then let me be the first." They stood there a moment, inches apart, and for once she didn't move away. Outside, Gabriel squealed as a butterfly brushed his cheek, and Grace called after him with a laugh that sounded like spring. Tessa looked toward the sound, then back at Jasper. "Stay for supper." His voice was quiet. "I'd like that." She nodded once and returned to the basin. He took up the drying cloth beside her, and they worked in silence, hands moving in rhythm. Two people beginning to fit into the same small world. The first real rain came late that spring, washing the dust from the hills and filling the cracks in the road with soft, brown water. Tessa stood in the doorway, apron damp at the hem, watching the path. Jasper had said he'd return that day with seed potatoes from a supplier west of Deer Lodge. He hadn't yet. She didn't pace. She didn't fret. But she did keep the coffee warm on the stove and the lantern lit by the window. When hoofbeats came through the rain near sundown, she didn't step out to meet him. She waited, hands quiet at her sides, as Jasper eased down from the saddle, his hat dripping and coat soaked through. He carried a burlap sack under one arm and nodded once through the downpour. "Had to go farther than I thought," he said, voice low and even. "They'd sold out in Deer Lodge, found these from a man near Avon." "You didn't need to go that far," she said, brushing wet hair from her cheek. "I wanted to bring what I said I would." She stepped back from the door. "Come in." "You'll catch cold out there." He hesitated only a moment before crossing the threshold, water pooling from his boots onto the floorboards. She pulled a dry wool blanket from the peg beside the hearth and handed it to him without a word. He took it, pressing the coarse weave to his shoulders with a grateful breath. "I can take your coat," she offered. He handed it over, careful not to let it drip on the children's drawings pinned to the wall near the stove. She hung it by the fire, then turned. "You'll stay for supper?" It wasn't a question. "I'd like to," he said. She ladled stew into bowls and set out the bread Grace had baked earlier, still warm under a cloth. The children were quiet that evening, not from shyness but from watching. They noticed how Jasper's gaze lingered on Tessa when she moved through the room, how she didn't flinch when he stood too near, how his hand brushed hers when passing the salt and neither of them pulled back. Later, when the children settled on the braided rug with their whittling or books, Jasper helped Tessa carry the wash basin to the back table. She poured in warm water, and he unwrapped a cloth parcel from his saddlebag darning needles, a roll of thread, and a small tin of saddle soap. "I figured you might have use for these," he said. "If not, I can take them back." Tessa ran her fingers over the spool. "You're not the kind of man who brings gifts just for the giving." "No," he said. "I bring what I hope might be useful. What might ease some part of your day." She folded the cloth back over the items. "You don't owe us anything." "I'm not paying a debt," he said. "I'm offering a place if you'd have me." The firelight caught the edge of his jaw, the slope of his cheekbone. He looked older in the quiet, worn not by age but by years of wind and distance. Tessa studied him, her voice low. "Do you mean to stay nearby?" "I was offered a line camp east of here. A cattleman who needs someone to ride fence and watch for poachers come summer. It's long work, but not far. That would keep you close. It would keep me steady." Her hands tightened around the edge of the basin. "I've lived on my own terms for 4 years. I won't trade that for a man who thinks he can come in and fix things." "I don't want to fix you," he said. "I want to stand beside you." She looked at him then, truly looked, and something inside her loosened. "Will it always be this quiet with you?" she asked, voice barely above the crackle of the hearth. "I don't know how to be anything else." She turned back to the dishes, dipping a plate into the water. He picked up a towel and dried beside her. Outside, the rain softened to a hush. Inside, the fire burned steady, and the children dozed one by one beneath quilts on the floor. When Jasper rose to leave, Tessa walked him to the door. He paused on the threshold, rain dripping from the eaves behind him. "I'll come back Wednesday." "You'll be welcome," she said. He hesitated, then reached beneath his coat and pulled out a small bundle and oilcloth tied with string. "Found this near Avon," he said. "Thought Grace might like it." She took it carefully, nodding. "I'll see that she does." Their eyes met and neither moved. He stepped down into the mud, turned once, and tipped his hat. She stood in the doorway long after he disappeared into the dark, the bundle warm in her hand, the firelight at her back. The wind carried the scent of lupine and wet earth as summer settled into the valley in full. Mornings came early now, the sun nudging over the ridgeline before the rooster had a chance to crow. Tessa stood at the back of the shed, sleeves rolled past her elbows, knees damp with dew, coaxing vines up trellises and brushing beetles off the cabbage leaves with the edge of her apron. Beside her, Jasper hammered new slats into a frame for the smokehouse she'd been meaning to build since the winter after Thomas died. "You ever do this work before?" she asked, eyeing the way he measured the boards without a second glance. "Some," he said, fitting a slat into place. "Helped my uncle mend a smokehouse in Kansas once, caught fire halfway through curing." "What happened?" "Lost the meat," he said, handing her the hammer, "but the frame held. He said that counted for something." She took the hammer without looking at him. "I don't always know what counts anymore. Then we figure it as we go." His voice was even but not distant. It had taken her months to learn the difference. A shriek rang out from the front of the house. Tessa straightened instantly, but Jasper didn't move. "That's the happy kind," he said. She waited a beat, then heard Grace's voice, clear and triumphant, calling to Gideon about a bird's nest near the fence line. Jasper stepped back, brushing sawdust from his hands. "You ever think about schooling for them?" he asked, nodding toward the sound of the children. "There's a teacher who rides up from Helmville twice a month. Sometimes we join when the weather holds." "Do they like it?" Grace reads everything she can get her hands on. Gideon wants to trap muskrats and trade pelts. Gabriel's too young to care as long as there's jam on his bread. Jasper leaned against the shed wall, arms folded. "You ever think about what you'd do once they're grown?" She hesitated, brushing a curl of hair from her temple with the back of her wrist. "I don't think that far. Days are full enough right now." "Would you want to stay here?" She looked at him then. This land was Thomas's dream. He built it up from nothing. "I've kept it because there wasn't another way." "But is it yours?" Tessa didn't answer, not because she didn't know, but because she had never been asked. Later, they sat at the edge of the pasture, the children tumbling through the grass in the field below. Jasper rested his elbows on his knees, hat balanced on one thigh. Tessa held a jar of cool water, the glass damp against her palm. "Tell me something about yourself I wouldn't guess," she said, not quite looking at him. He considered it. "I used to play fiddle." She blinked. "Truly, not well," he said, "but I could keep time. My father taught me before he passed, sold the fiddle to buy my horse. You ever miss it?" "Sometimes, more when it's quiet." She glanced toward the house. "It's rarely quiet here." "I don't mind that kind." She let herself laugh, soft and surprised. "If I found you another fiddle, would you play?" He shrugged one shoulder. "Wouldn't stop me." They sat in the low hum of the day, insects buzzing, the laughter of children rising over the field. Tessa leaned back on her hands, closing her eyes against the sun. "You've been here near all season," she said. "Don't you get restless?" "I used to need to keep moving," he said. "Now I wake up and think about what needs doing here. It's different." She opened her eyes, turning toward him. "I know what it is to want to stay in one place. What I don't know is how to let someone else do the same." Jasper didn't move. "You give me a place to stand and I'll hold to it." Grace came running up the hill then, cheeks flushed, hair tangled with burrs. "Ma." "Gideon's got a splinter in his hand and won't let me pull it." Tessa stood, brushing grass from her skirt. "Bring him to the porch. I'll get the needle." As Grace ran off, Tessa turned to Jasper. "You coming?" He rose without a word and followed her, walking side by side, nothing hurried, nothing forced. That night, after the dishes were dried and the children put to bed, she stepped out onto the porch and found him already there, seated on the top step, boots off, socks damp from the grass. He held something in his lap, a folded cloth, worn and faded. She sat beside him, just close enough to feel the warmth of his shoulder. "This is yours?" she asked. He opened the cloth to reveal a fiddle, body dulled with time, bow strung with horsehair gone loose at one end. "Traded a saddle blanket for it in Avon," he said. "Figured it might belong here." Tessa didn't speak. She just watched as he lifted the instrument, tested the strings, and coaxed a low, wavering note into the night air. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. He played something slow, something that sounded like the space between seasons. And Tessa, wrapped in the hush of twilight, let herself lean just slightly against his arm. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He was still there when the last note faded, and she stayed beside him until the stars came out one by one. The last of the summer hay had been stacked high in the loft, and the days grew shorter by the week. The children slept longer in the mornings now, worn out from the harvest days and cool evenings. Tessa woke before the sun, as she always had, and found Jasper already outside, splitting wood at the edge of the tree line where the ground sloped toward the creek. She didn't call to him. She watched from the porch with her arms crossed against the chill, her breath fogging faintly in the early air. When he came in, she had coffee waiting and a biscuit wrapped in a cloth. He took them both with a nod of thanks, then leaned against the wall near the stove, steam rising from his shoulders. "You've been quiet these past few days," she said. He looked at her over the rim of the tin cup. "Trying to ask a thing the right way." She set the kettle back on the iron plate. "Go on then," he cleared his throat. "I've been offered a stretch of land, 40 acres east of the Pine Ridge. It's not much, but it borders yours, runs along the creek." She didn't speak, eyes steady on his face. "I could take it," he said. "Build something proper, a barn. Maybe a house come spring," or he stopped. "Or I could stay here if that's what you'd have." She moved to the table, sat down slow. "You mean to marry?" "I do." She studied her hands. Her voice came low but without hesitation. "I've never been asked, not properly. Thomas and I, we made a life out of necessity. We wanted it, but we didn't plan it." Jasper stepped closer. "Then let's plan this one. No rushing, no expecting more than what's real, but I'd like to ask you, today." She stood, the stove casting a flicker of warmth across her dress. "You'll need to speak with the children." "I was hoping to." Grace and Gideon had roused by then and were setting the table with plates and salt. Gabriel toddled in after, dragging a wooden cow Jasper had carved weeks earlier. The kitchen smelled of late apples and lard biscuits. Tessa called them to sit, and once they'd settled with hands washed and hair combed, Jasper rested his arms on the table and looked at each of them in turn. "I want to speak plain," he said. "I've asked your mother if she'd marry me. The kind of marrying that means I stay, help raise you, and grow old beside her if she'll allow it." Gideon's brow furrowed. "Does that mean we'd be your children too?" "It means I'd stand for you like you were," Jasper said. "Always." Grace looked at her mother, then back to him. "Would we have to leave?" "No," Tessa said. "We'd stay, and if we build more, it'll be together, one step at a time." Gabriel banged the wooden cow on the table, and Grace laughed, sudden and bright. "Fine," Gideon said. "But only if you let me help build the barn." "Deal," Jasper said. Later that week, they walked the boundary line together. Tessa wore a shawl against the wind, and Jasper carried a length of rope to mark where the fence would need mending. They stopped at the edge of the creek where a cottonwood leaned low. "This spot," she said, her voice soft. "I used to come here when I needed quiet. After Thomas passed, I'd sit on that root and just listen." He crouched, pressed his hand to the damp earth. "I could build the house facing this way." She joined him, resting her hand on his. "I'd like that." They were married the next Sunday, under the cottonwood. Grace tied a ribbon in her hair and stood with Gabriel on her hip. Gideon held the ring in his palm like it was something sacred. The preacher from Helmville rode in for the service, and afterward the neighbors brought jars of preserves and pie, and they passed around coffee thick with grounds. Tessa wore a simple blue dress, the same one she'd worn when she buried Thomas, but she held her head differently now. Not hardened. Not guarded, just steady. Jasper's coat was pressed, his boots cleaned, and his voice didn't waver once when he said the words. That night the children slept in their usual places, and the house stood quiet beneath a sky full of stars. Jasper sat on the porch, his fiddle resting beside him. Tessa came out with 2 quilts folded over her arms. "Thought we might stay out here a while," she said. He took one from her and spread it across his lap. "That sounds right." She settled beside him, shoulder to shoulder, their hands finding each other with ease. The wind moved through the grass, soft and slow. She tilted her head against his. "You were right." "About what?" "Some things are worth learning, even after." He lifted her hand, pressed it to his lips. "And some things are worth waiting for." They stayed on the porch until the chill turned sharp. Then they went inside, lit a small fire, and fell asleep with the sound of the creek carrying through the open window. Years passed. The barn rose by the 3rd spring, with Gideon and Jasper laying every beam together. Grace became a teacher and rode into Helmville twice a month to help the new schoolmistress. Gabriel planted rows of sunflowers along the fence and called them his army. Tessa kept her garden, kept her quiet mornings, and kept Jasper close. He never missed a meal, never missed a harvest, never stopped playing the fiddle even when the strings wore thin. And on calm nights, when the air was still and the children long asleep, they sat wrapped in quilts on the porch of the house they'd built together not from necessity, but from choice. Their love held not in grand declarations, but in the steady rhythm of days shared, burdens halved, and a life fully lived together.